Teenagers are having sex, and teenagers have been having sex for a long time. But what's disturbing isn't that, it's all the adults that are promoting it. Most adults are promoting teen and child sex, and that includes you who's watching this. And I'll show you how it's happening because you're not likely even aware as to how your own actions can end up supporting the exploitations of teenagers. Now, I'm not a political or social commentary guy. My job is to help men do well in their dating and relationships and sex life. I coach people using science based tools to increase their mental performance and to have a better life. So, this video isn't really a part of what I normally do. I don't normally discuss underage sexual behavior. And in some ways, it may seem contradictory because part of my job has been in helping adults have more frequent and better quality sex. So, why get into this? Well, all of the ratchet behavior that you're experiencing from for the men that I coach, from women in the dating market, all stems back to childhood sexual experiences and starting sex too early, and in a lot of cases too frequently, going through breakup cycles before the brain is fully mature, and all of the negative consequences that happens when a not yet fully mature brain starts having sexual experiences. So all your divorces, all of your problems with the women in the dating market, and for some of you women who catch this video, for all of your problems with the men in the dating market, as well as the incel crisis, men being addicted to pornography, all that stuff stems from childhood experiences. Most people started their pornography addictions while they were teenagers. And most women started their sexual behavior while they were in their teens, the average age being 15 for most girls, for when they start having sex for the first time or their first sexual experiences. So that's the one thing. Okay. So that as far as the dating and relationships are concerned, we've been doing this now for a few generations, promoting teen promiscuous sexual behavior without the context of a relationship or marriage for quite some time. And that's what's led to all the dating and problems and relationship problems we have today. And we seem to have this illusion that you can just do whatever with no consequences, and that promiscuity or having starting that process too early is going to not have a consequence in your brain. That seems to be what the narrative is. Well, I'm going to show you that it's not, and I'm going to show you how to approach it, and I'm going to show you how to handle it. But for those of you guys who are my normal audience, who are looking to date and stuff like that, I mean, there's a couple of reasons to watch this. One is that you might have a daughter someday. Okay. So those of you who have children, those of you who have daughters, if you don't have a daughter, maybe you have a niece, maybe you have a nephew, maybe you have kids that you influence in your family, whether they're your kids or somebody else's. You need a better way of approaching this topic with your children in your life. Much better than what was done for you, and much better than what's being done now. What's being done now is more of a check the block kind of an attitude by parents who feel like teen sexual behavior is a normal part of growing up. Whether they say so or not, that is really what the inherent belief is, and that's what the social construct is. Oh, it's just normal. It's just a normal teen experience. Well, they're not looking at the recent data of how harmful these experiences can be on a developing brain. So we have data now today that we didn't have before, but we're going with old ways of looking at things. And most of you parents who are watching me, or adults who might have kids someday, you're approaching this all wrong. you approach it anywhere near the way your parents did and other adults, to include sex educators in the school, did, it's going to be wrong. And it's your teenagers are going to go out and have sexual experiences, and those experiences are going to frame them and how they approach relationships for the rest of their lives. It's going to frame their brain development, and it's going to potentially cause a whole lot of problems for them, which is why you've had problems possibly. And if not you directly, why your girlfriends, your wives, your long-term partners have had problems. All right. It's especially damaging to women. So for starters, for those of you who have any influence on kids, your own or someone else's, you need to be educated on how to approach this topic in a different way than what's been taught, because what's been taught has been the wink and the nod method. That's what I call it. It's basically like, don't have sex until you're mature and you're ready. Wink, nod. And then of course, kids are out experiencing and boys are pursuing sex when they're 13, 14, and girls are starting to have their experiences around the same age. It's like we just kind of check the block. I said the right thing to say it's bad. I don't really know why it's bad. That's another thing. Most of you parents and adults can't articulate why it's bad outside of maybe potentially unplanned pregnancies and STIs, which are seen as low consequence for a teen because those are seen as preventable. If you can, get on birth control, get on contraception, use a condom, or, abort a baby. These consequences are not that heavy for the adolescent brain who's looking to, have these experiences with the opposite sex. So most of you are not approaching it from a brain development standpoint, and that's wrong. Okay, because it's a narrative that needs to change. You're basically checking the block, kind of giving the wink and the nod, knowing they're going to have sexual experiences. And then it's this mindset or attitude of, positive sexual discussions. And there's a word for it now. It just left me, but, positive parenting and stuff like that, where basically you get to be your kid's friend and talk about sex with your kid. And then that's seen as okay or productive. And it's all, some of that stuff is very well meaning. Okay. But but I need to be harsh with you. Well-meaning doesn't get the job done. Well-meaning still gets your daughters raped. Well-meaning still gets your kids to have sexual experiences. Well-meaning parents still end up with their kids going down a pathway of getting trafficked and getting exploited in serious cases, or just having a lot of voluntary sexual experiences that lead to an inability to pair bond and an inability to have successful relationships later. And all you parents who want to pat yourself on the backs and you don't want to sit here and confront the mistakes you're making because you don't want to feel bad, you're removing yourself out of the accountability portion of this equation. You guys are the fucking problem, okay? Because the kid's brain's not developed yet. 13, 15, 17-year-old kid. Brain's not fully developed yet. Body is, brain's not. It's up to you as the adults to change the narrative, to have discussions in a different way than you are. And all you guys are doing is checking the block so you can say that you did. So it's something that people did in the military, they do some training or they do some maintenance or something and they check the block so they can tell the higher ups that they did the right thing. Meanwhile, their equipment falls apart and the training, they have to apply the training and they suck at it because they didn't really do the job. Okay. So a lot of you adults are not really doing the job. You're checking the block on an uncomfortable topic and you're not breaching this the right way. So I encourage you, for those of you who have the courage to watch this video till the end, to please do so and take to heart what I'm saying, because your brain right now wants to tell me to go fuck myself. Okay. Your brain right now wants to give all the reasons how you're a good parent and you're doing the right thing, rather than open up your brain to the fact that your paradigm, which is the same one you grew up with and the same one that we're promoting out in society, that paradigm is causing teens and kids to get exploited sexually. All right. That you're a part of the problem, because if you're not changing this, and you have to have some accountability on it. We've all been that person. We've all been checking the block. Me too, until recently, more a couple of years ago, I'd say, but even more recently, I just want to have this. Some things have come up, and it makes me want to have this talk a little bit more deeply with you guys, even though it's outside of the scope of what I normally do. It's an important conversation. And so now it's not just important now for the kids, though, okay? Because a lot of you guys who watch me are like, cool, but I'm interested in dating advice, or how can I be more successful? Should I even spend the rest of the time on this video? Well, yeah, you should, because your experiences, as well as the experiences of the girls you're going to date or be in a long-term relationship with or whatever, they've had early teen sexual experiences that have framed their brain development for the rest of their lives. And a lot of those are going to be maladaptive or bad patterns. So the girls you're dating, they have bad patterns, and many of those bad patterns started developing when they were young. Okay. From the same kind of narratives and stuff. I'm more of a Gen X guy, right? I grew up with the same stuff. All right. Boomers, same thing. I mean, right. So, since the sexual revolution in the 60s, we have been promoting the sex positive idea, which in some ways could be beneficial for adults, but we have not been separating things properly when it comes to underage. And when I say underage, I'm talking under 21. I'm not even talking under 18. I mean, if we were doing it for under 18, we'd be a lot better off. But there's still development happening between 18 to 21 that needs to be considered, which means sexual behavior during that time is actually really risky and risky for the brain. And I stand by this, that if young girls would all just abstain from sex until they were 21 years old, and I'll say guys too, just because there's benefits for the guys too, okay? It's more damaging to the women than the men from a brain science perspective, but it is damaging to both. So let's say men and women, young teenagers, were to stave off sex just until they're 21. Understand, I'm not a prude, okay? I believe in having frequent and good sex in your life as an adult, not as a kid. So if they were all to stave off till 21, you would see a completely different society in terms of how the sexual marketplace is handled and approached, and you would see a completely different way of handling relationships from both sides of the equation, and people would have more successful long-term relationships and more successful short-term relationships too. I mean, it's not to demonize that. Sometimes you get in a sexual relationship and it's not going to be a forever relationship, and that happens, right? Happens to everybody pretty much, but those would be handled a lot better with a mature brain that wasn't previously framed and traumatized and caused to develop in a certain way from teenage sexual behavior. The adult mature brain handling that stuff without the framing of previous damage from teenage behavior is going to handle that stuff a lot better, right? And so I stand by that. That is just a 100%. And so I'm going to prove it to you with science. It's not bullshit, and we're going to give you some tools, okay? So that's what's nice about this one. All right. If you guys got any questions, I did. I fucking did. I did. I went all out, bro. I went all out. I'm going all out, man. YouTube be damned. I put a trigger warning in the beginning, so hopefully they don't ban my video, man. You know what I'm saying? It's a challenge, but that's Rational Male here. Thank you. Hopefully that's a real Rational Male. Good to see you, Rollo. Appreciate it. All right, so let's go through this a little bit. Questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. Try to get to them at the end. Okay, so I came across some of this stuff because, like, what caused me to sort of go down this rabbit hole, all right, is during some of my military operations, I had the unfortunate experience. I can't get into full details because some of that stuff is classified still, but I had the unfortunate experience of getting an opportunity, we'll say, to learn all about some of the serious sex traffickers out there. This is why I take exception to how some of the media talks about this stuff because they're not making distinctions. There's a scale. There's a big difference between cam girls and porn and cam managers. All right. And some of the, stuff that might go on behind those scenes that are a bit immoral and everything. But we're talking like there's a big difference between a girl who is there voluntarily, all right, even though they may have a manager or a pimp, okay, and they're just as much part of the decision making in regards to their sex work with men. There's a big difference between that and the serious sex trafficking where kids are kidnapped, are violently abused, and are forced into drug addiction and into a dependency on their kidnappers and then used for sexual exploitation, usually until their lives are shortened and eventually ended. Right. When I say kids, I mean kids. We're talking average age of trafficked people in that environment are 12, 13, 15. Like the range is between 12 and 15 where they groomed and kidnap these kids. So that stuff's pretty horrific. And it causes me to ask questions and go down the rabbit hole and figure out, well, how does this stuff happen? It happens all over the world, and what's going on? Well, when I come to realize and research further, so these kids who are kidnapped and put into horrible trafficking scenarios, which I mean is this huge it's this huge enterprise, multi-billion-dollar business. I had a website up somewhere, and it's not, but it's this gigantic criminal enterprise. Let's see here. I got a flip chart here. Human trafficking is the second largest criminal enterprise in the world at $150 billion industry. All right. Number of cases. We increased 40% from 2019 to 2020. So we're 2025 now. So I don't know, but more than 100,000 kids just in the US are exploited each year. So this is a big deal. This is not like a small deal. All right. It's something that we don't talk about, and we're going to get into what that is, but it's like researching, okay, how does this stuff start? Like, how does it happen? Well, it happens through grooming, and it happens through adults really getting the kid, whether it's a 15-year-old, 14-year-old kid, right, voluntarily going into environments with the traffickers, voluntarily entering into, meeting people, hanging out, doing stuff, getting exposed to drugs, getting exposed to partying, getting exposed to a lifestyle at a really young age. And so it starts there, and then they're sort of groomed and pinpointed as a potential candidate for kidnapping, because a kid with a good family whose parents have accountability over that kid, that's going to be a tough one for traffickers to kidnap, because the kid's probably not going to go into the situations where they could get kidnapped as easily. And if they are kidnapped, those parents are going to do a lot to find them. And I'm not to say that there aren't kids with good backgrounds that, sometimes kids do get, the bag thrown over their head and thrown in a van kind of scenario. But that scenario is more risky for the kidnappers, you see. So if they can create this sort of, and you guys know about Epstein, stuff like that, if they can create this thing where there's grooming, where other girls and women who've been groomed are a part of the equation, and they bring the girls or even the boys in that case in and offer them, offer them an illusion of some sort of a benefit to them, good lifestyle, whatever, then they end up, it turns into a non-consensual relationship from there. But they're have a good reason to believe that no one's going to come looking for that kid. They don't have enough support at home because they're able to sneak out and leave and meet up with people. And they're putting themselves in the scenarios. So like, then they can be, well, this kid could have run away. This kid hit the streets. Law enforcement's not looking for a kid who ran away or just disappeared because he went out when he wasn't supposed to. Versus if some kid's walking home from school in a nice neighborhood and gets a bag thrown over their head and thrown into a van, well, that's going to alert the cops, you see? And so that's how this kind of thing develops. Well, kids are not putting themselves in that position. If it's not for a social narrative that's designed to exploit children, and if it's not for parents who are not really taking a proper approach when it comes to the risks of sex with children. And so parents are not prepping their kids for, what can potentially happen. And it's not even just that. Like kids are thinking they can have sex. Like young girls are thinking, I can have a 22-year-old boyfriend at 15, 16, and that's okay. The narrative, the social narrative and the parenting allows for this stuff to happen. It's that wink and a nod. And so the wink and a nod parenting, okay, where they check the block, say, hey, don't do it. And then they let their kids do whatever, that exposes kids to further trafficking. Okay. So there's that aspect of it. Then there's another aspect, which is, okay, not just the kids that are being trafficked, but kids are like exploiting each other. 13, 14, 15, the kids are having sex with each other, right? And that's somewhat innate, and I'll get into that. But that's happening with, again, wink and a nod parenting, oh, my daughter's going to go stay at her boyfriend's house when she's 16, or this is going to happen, that's going to happen. And there's no discussions with these kids as they grow as to the consequences of sex on their brain and on their long-term possibility of success, because a lot of you guys don't even understand what those consequences are and that long-term possibility, right? And so that's what's going on. That's the nefarious thing. And how about so when you think about it, adults are basically saying to kids, here's what sex is. And oh, by the way, it feels awesome. And your hormones are going to, make sex consume your brain and drive you to do this right now. But son or daughter, don't do it unless you feel ready. Okay. Because there's risk out there, and that's STIs, which are completely preventable, by the way. And most of them are curable if we'll just go to the doctor if you get something. And there's risk of pregnancy, which is also completely preventable, by the way. And there's, we can just get an abortion if it comes down to that. So, those are your risks. Don't do it unless you're ready. By the way, sex is awesome. I'm a sex positive parent. We can talk about all these things, and I want you to feel comfortable with me as an adult. Okay, so when that's the approach, now go ahead and go back upstairs to your bedroom and get on the internet, unsupervised, where porn is free and everything is sexualized in advertising. There's almost no incentive for teens and kids to not have sex. There's almost zero, right? Where's the incentive to not do it with that kind of a mindset, with that kind of mentality? Adults are talking about the two smallest risks to teen sex, and that's STI and pregnancy. Not small risks because they're not important. Obviously, a teen pregnancy is a real problem, but smallest risk because they're the most preventable. And in most cases, reversible, right? And statistically, these things are not as high considering the amount of teens that are having sex. Considering that majority of teens have sexual experiences, most are not getting pregnant, most are not getting STIs, even though it's a risk. So what's being highlighted is these really a small preventable risk that doesn't register with a teenager. What's not being talked about is the risk to their brain and sexual imprinting that will last for the rest of their lives. They're framing, do you want your daughter, let me ask you, do you want your daughter's future relationship success We're talking the ability to get married, the ability to have, have grandkids for you, children of her own, right? The ability to be happy with a good dude, right? That's your daughter. You want that ability for her to pick that guy and have a good, healthy relationship with that guy, predicated by the sex she's going to have with some asshole she meets in high school, or worse, the college guy she's dating when she's 16, 17. Do you want the rest of her life framed by that? Well, probably not, right? But guess what? If you're not having that conversation, that's what's happening. She's having, she's that 16-year-old, 17-year-old getting into the frat party to meet her boyfriend, who's also screwing a couple other 16, 17-year-olds. If that's not, if that's your daughter, guess what? You've set her up for failure. You've allowed her to set herself up for failure. Okay. Why wouldn't she? Why wouldn't she go do that? There's no reason not to, based on the conversations you're having with your teens, based on the conversations school and the school system's having, based on the conversation that, the social narrative that's out there. There's no reason for her not to go bang the college guy. No reason. No reason for the teen boy to not try to get as much sexual opportunity as he can get with whatever girl he can kind of get it with when he's, hormones are raging, right? No reason, because we're not talking about brain science. We're not talking about brain health, which is the third consequence, according to a book called Hooked. I'll put the link and I'll put my sources. They're not there yet. I will put sources in the description because a lot of the stuff is going to be shocking to some of you guys. But I'll put it all there. It's all there. Okay. The neuroscience is out. This isn't a mystery. All right. And so the silent evil is that kids are having sex too early and adults are supporting it and encouraging it. And they're doing so by concealing the biggest risk, which is the way that your brain alters. And it'll do it in such a way where you cannot have a future happiness in a long-term relationship. All right. And this leads to the relationship and marriage crisis that we're in today. So hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have a better, clear understanding, as well as some things that you can do to help have better conversations with kids about sex, so you don't end up being one of the many adults who ends up inadvertently encouraging teen sex, whether you're a parent or maybe just an older sibling or maybe someone in a position to have these conversations. Now, I'm going to attempt to go through at the end the reasons why you guys listening, many of you and other adults, are not only encouraging teen sex, but why it's difficult for people to accept this. It's kind of like the notch count argument in a way. Like, people push back. I mean, we know that for a girl to collect notches, it makes her less likely to be successful in a long-term relationship. That's pretty scientific. We know it. We know that information. The data is out there, and there's brain reasons why. Okay. That's a topic for other videos I've done, so you can go watch those. So, I mean, I'm not trying to demonize sex or casual sex necessarily, but you got to know the risks. And that's a real topic, but everybody pushes back on that. All right. Well, this is similar reasons of the pushback on notch count for women. We have pushback on having sex too early. When I say too early, I'm telling you, under 21 years old, which is not the social narrative. Social narrative is 18, and I'll give you reasons why I say under 21. Now, to be fair, if someone, does have sex when they're 18 or 19 years old, that's better than having it at 13 or 14 or 15. Certainly better, but not optimal. There's still a lot of framing and still a lot of damage that can be done to an 18, 19-year-old boy or girl, but particularly, again, this is a higher risk for girls, and I'll get into why that is. Okay. But the algorithms won't likely allow this video to get found. So please like it, share it, and make it a conversation. Okay. Try to get it out there. It's something that I know is going to get shut down People are going to want to shut it off. People are going to want to push back. I'm encouraging you to not do that and just have an open mind, okay? And to share the stuff, because we need to talk about it more. And if you're a content creator, man, like take this topic and run with that too for a little bit. Talk about it too. Like it's not about me. It's not about this video on my channel. It's about really just getting the message out there. Okay. And so now, of course, don't believe me. I'm going to share a little. Let me share a little video here. Okay. So let me just show you a little example, and then we'll get in a quick little slideshow on brain health here. There we go. Hopefully you guys can hear this. In case you don't believe me, this is Old School, the movie Old School. And it's a little old now at this point, but so what? We'll watch it.
Oh, shit.
Now that was a party. Since when are you so shy?
No, I'm not. I just...
Did I snore last night? Sometimes I snore when I'm drunk.
I don't remember.
So take note
I
that
don't think
girl
so.
in this video, the time of doing this movie, she was
last night,
21 years old.
I just got out of a very
Playing a
serious
17-year-old.
traumatic relationship, and I'm kind of in a weird place right now.
I'm going to help you see through the matrix on this a little bit.
Relax, Rich. It's not a big deal.
Mitch, with an M.
Right. Look. Whatever. We were just having a little fun. You have nothing to worry about.
No,
That is correct.
yeah, you're right.
Bang the
I'm
boss.
okay with it.
That's
I just, it's casual.
I gotta go to class, so
So how do we do this? Shall I? Do you want to leave me your number, or shall I?
you know what? You don't even have to worry about it.
Okay.
See you around.
Bye.
Okay, so we got that little scene there, and then I'll show the next one that came out after that. There we go. Sorry, I'm not as quick on my buttons as it should be. All right. Yeah, so okay, cool. They banged. All right. And where is the video? Sorry, I'm struggling to find where my anyway. So yeah, so they okay, so he had this party. Is that it? Yeah, here we go.
Honey.
Hi, Dad. Am I interrupting?
No, come on in. Hi. I don't think you've met my daughter, Darcy. This is Mitch Martin.
Hi. Nice to meet you, Mitch.
Hi. Nice to meet you. How was the slumber party?
Great. Movie.
Okay, so there you go. So that's the boss. So basically, you bang the boss's daughter, and haha, that's the funny part of whatever, right? So like, that's and it was part of the movie. So I'm just sharing that. It's not that like, it's not that I'm not even looking at my comments. I got to read what Ryan wrote in a minute. All right. It's not that like, okay, that's not a funny movie or whatever. That's not a scenario that could happen. Whatever. I'm not trying to moralize it. All right. But I want to show you how even just in normal culture, sexualizing teen sex and stuff like that in a teenage girl sleeping with an older guy is pretty well normalized. Like there was no pushback on this movie. I mean, he checked the block of, oh, I'm surprised she's underaged because it's the boss's daughter, and that led to the plot and everything. But when you see the girl and her behavior and everything, it's like, this is empowering to the girl and this is acceptable. And that's the social narrative. And today movies are way worse. And then throwing in LGBTQ stuff where, I mean, you can start naming shows, most of them shows I don't really watch because I'm just whatever, but where there's high amounts of sexualization of teens. I mean, it's pretty much unhinged, right? And so we got that. We know that that's what's going on. All right. So in case you didn't believe it, so uncomfortable truth out there, 60% of high school teens who've been having sex, most of them have had multiple partners. 1 in 4 of these girls have had sex at 15. So let's look at some of the data here. All right. So we look at college group of girls, 18 to 24. So here's the data. All right. So you have about 35% that have had 0 to 1 partners by the time they're between the ages of 18 and 24, according to one of the studies, but whatever. All right. Now, problems with the studies, which I've talked about before, is that girls lie on the studies. They don't tell the truth. There's a lot of not telling the truth on survey style studies. So, and it's very hard to mitigate against that when we're talking about previous sexual experiences. That being said, we're going to go with what we have. You have 35% of young girls who are, many of them effectively female incels, which there are female incels, women who are young girls who have disabilities, morbidly obese, very, very socially awkward, so just a lot of things that prevent them from having access really to sex or trying to get access to sex. That's when you deal with that bottom 35%, those are the invisible girls. Okay. So you have this, and this is what you guys who are dating right now and on dating apps and stuff don't realize, that just like most of you, like 80% of guys are invisible to women, you have about 30, maybe 35%. I would say maybe not 35%, probably about 25% of girls that are invisible to the guys because they're just not sexually marketable and they're not out there for whatever reason that is. All right. So when we look at statistics like notch count and early sexual experiences, that is very much skewed by this 25% of female incel cohort. Those are not the people you're seeing when you're out there dating. Those are not the ones that you're going to hook up with and look at relationship potential with or any of that kind of stuff, because you won't see them. They're invisible as far as you know when you're on dating apps or when you're out at the coffee place trying to talk to girls or wherever you go, right? So that's that. You got this 0 to 1 notch. You got 0 to 1 notches with the lower 35%. But that's not to say that these are moral girls who have like this really good, healthy mindset towards sex or anything like that. Like the church girl that's destined to be somebody's wife someday. That's not who we're dealing with when we're dealing with that 35%. We're dealing with probably most of those girls being very sexually not marketable with a lot of potential mental health and physical health issues that would prevent them from being in the marketplace. Okay, so that's something you have to consider. So we got to consider the rest, okay, of 2/3 to 3/4 of women. All right, starting from these stats, 18 to 24, those are the ones who are actually out there dating. Those are the sexually marketable girls. Out of those, you have about 35% that have between 4 and 9 sexual partners between the ages of 18 and 24. So these are more of your serial monogamy types, and I'll get into that. That behavior still started when they were younger, and that framed things for potentiality of having not good relationship success later. Not as bad as our promiscuous cohort, but still we're going to deal with baggage. We're going to deal with emotional problems still. We're going to deal with attachment issues. We're going to deal with a lot of the problems that, women tend to bring guys in relationships with this cohort. And that's your 4 to 9, okay, notches between 18 and 24, because, some 18 or 19-year-old taking this quiz didn't sleep with 9 people in the last year if she's more of a serial monogamy kind of girl, meaning we wouldn't consider her the slutty girl, right? And so your normal, what we would consider like your normal girl, is sleeping between 4 to 9 people between 18 and 24, which means that started very early. So if that 19-year-old is the one taking the survey, chances are she's with a boyfriend or maybe maybe she just started college or something, and the 6 people she slept with, chances are 3 or 4 of them happened when she was a teenager, right? And so that's what's going on there. And then you got about the rest of them where they don't even put numbers on these studies. It's like plus 10, right? So more than 10. So 18 to 24, you got the upper, 1/3 that's fairly promiscuous. And they're practicing a lot of short-term promiscuous mating behavior. Okay, so not mate switching. Mate switching is getting into a relationship with one person, then switching to another. These are the one night stands. I got banged at a party. I slept with 2 guys or 3 guys in one day. That's what we're dealing with. 18 to 24 plus 10. So that could be 20, that could be 50, right? And so you guys who talk about, these girls who are racking up notches, well, when we talk about it, we're generally talking about that 35 upper percentile, that 1/3, that upper 1/3, okay? Versus the middle, and we don't even see the invisible lower. All right. So that's just to give you an idea about what's happening there and what's going on there. So in a nutshell, right? Sex is happening. It's happening with teenagers. It's happening when they're young. The process is starting young, whether they're promiscuous girls or whether they're your average kind of I sleep with my boyfriend type of a girl. Okay. So that's what's going on. It's starting young. Now let's go over why that's a problem, because I think people moralize it without understanding the science behind it. So we're going to get into that now. So let's see here. All right. So let's look at the 13-year-old brain. We're going to go through and look at brain scans. Okay. And again, I will works cited all this stuff. When I'm done with this stream, I'll go back, recommend a couple books, some of the recent research. So this is all very solid on the research side from neurology. Okay. So let's look at a 13-year-old. And why am I starting at 13? Well, here's the thing. For all you religious folks out there, I just put a tweet out there too that described this. The rules in the Muslim world, at least according to the internet, some people might argue with me, but the rules in Islam is 9 years old and up is okay for sex. Now, granted, they're saying in the context of a marriage or whatever, but 9 years old and up, as long as her body is big enough for sexual intercourse. Like that's literally the quote. Okay. And that goes back to Sharia law from a long time ago. So, hey, the world of Islam, and they're certainly practicing in this in places like Afghanistan and Syria and all over the world. Okay. Girls are getting hitched up and having sex at age, maybe not 9, but it does definitely happen. But 10, 11, 12, 13, that's what goes on around the world in the Muslim world. And therefore, and even in the United States, although most of my Americanized Muslim friends are not necessarily saying, hey, let's let our daughters hook up and start having, get married at 13. It's still in the mindset of that world. And I'm starting with Muslims, but don't Christians and Jews, you're not safe. Okay. So Christians, when you do an internet search, I mean, it's saying between 12 and 14 is considered consensual age, even though nothing is expressed in the Bible. And churches don't necessarily have a doctrine that states when sex is okay for a young person. But the general consensus is that kids are having sex. Go to places down in the deep South, I've been to some of these churches before when I was younger. Trust me, kids are hooking up. And they say not to. Again, it's a wink and a nod. Don't do it. But, now they're having sex at the church retreat at 13. So the general acceptance is that consent happens then. Now, obviously, if somebody were to Christian marry or something at 14 and get consent, I mean, some circles of the world are okay with it. This is just the rules and the practices. So I'm not saying that Christians and Muslims are saying that, like, if you're sitting here, you're Christian or Muslim, you're going to probably say, well, that's not me. I don't think that. Okay. But in your religious leadership and doctrines and written place, in places things are written, and in certain behaviors in church communities, this is what's happening, and it's being justified as being okay. And so then in Judaism, there is something called child marriage, which starts at 12. Generally speaking, though, most rabbis are, some rabbis say 18, other rabbis say 14 or as early as possible, because they want to stave off the propensity of having premarital sex. They want the girl and the guy to get married before they have sex. So that's Judaism. And a lot of this stuff is, again, is in the context of marriage. But the problem is that it's still saying that sex is okay for young people, which completely violates science and leads to bad outcomes, because the 13, 14-year-old is like, yeah, I'm a young Jewish guy or girl, and I know I'm supposed to wait till I'm married, but sex would be acceptable if I were married. And so it opens the door for sexual activity, because there isn't any discuss about brain science, right? No discussion about that. So a lot of you kind of, I know I'm going to get the traditional conservatives of any of the Abrahamic religions, I'm going to get people to tell me, well, in Judaism or in Islam or in Christianity, this is how it is. Well, no, it's not. You guys promote the same shit. You do it covertly, though. Oh, and you say it's in the context of marriage. But the problem is it doesn't end up in marriage. And there's problems with teen marriage as well. Like, that's a big problem in terms of, future success in 2025. Okay. We're not in ancient times anymore, guys. And so, like, you can't justify this stuff. You have to have a different conversations is the point. All right. So I'm starting it here. So the 13-year-old brain, let's go over this. Prefrontal cortex is among the last area to mature. All right. That's what does all the thinking. Okay. So children at 13 lack the ability to adequately judge risk or make long-term plans. Ask a kid at this age what they want to be when they grow up, and they're often going to change their mind. Now, as far as emotional development, deep in the limbic system, a capacity for creating emotion increases. So 13-year-old girls and boys certainly can have emotion, but as this capacity is unrestrained by the frontal lobe or prefrontal cortex. Okay, so the prefrontal cortex is not as developed enough yet. The emotions are developing. This is why young teen girls in particularly are out of control emotionally. Okay, they're all over the place. This is where you have erratic emotions in teenagers, because their emotional areas are developing, which includes, by the way, sexual attraction and sexual desire. Their bodies are equipping them to be sexual beings. They're starting to mature, but the frontal lobe can't regulate it. So they have no ability to regulate this stuff other than rules. The only thing that could regulate it is the external environment that can regulate it for them. That's rules, and that's parameters, and that's ideas behind the rules that the adults leverage. On their own, with high sexual drive and high emotion, they are not going to self-regulate. They rely on an adult to give them the tools to do that. Okay, so that's at 13. 13, the most common age for being sex trafficked is this age. So they're underdeveloped, all right? Logic, the parietal lobes are developing rapidly, but the child's intelligence and analytical abilities are still expanding. So we're just dealing with an underdeveloped brain, okay? Now, what happens when sexual activity happens in an underdeveloped brain, it starts to steer the way that the brain continues to develop. I'll give you an example, all right? Is language. So, like, okay, when you are at a critical age of brain development, when you're young as a child, that's an age where you can really learn and adapt to other languages. So you can learn a second language, not only very easily, but you train so the act of learning and becoming bilingual for a 4-year-old kid, for example, when that brain has that level of neuroplasticity and development, changes the way that 4-year-old's brain develops. So a 4-year-old who learns a language and grows up in a bilingual household, for example, or parents start teaching them another language between I'm not an early childhood development expert, but I think it's like between 4 and 6 or 7. When they learn that language at a young age, their brain changes and develops and allows them to learn foreign languages much easier as an adult. Now, none of this means that you can't learn a foreign language as an adult. I struggled through foreign language in the military and I managed to pass. Okay. But because I didn't learn as a child, my brain did not change and make it more adaptable and easy for me. I was able to learn it, but it was definitely a struggle. And I would probably argue that my understanding of a foreign language is not going to be as good as somebody who learned it when they were younger and had their brains develop around it. So the action or activity of training the brain to do a language when the brain is still developing, okay, causes that adaptation to occur in the brain. The brain physically adapts differently than another person's brain who's not learning a language. Okay, so you understand how that works now and how adaptable a child or kid's brain is. Well, similarly, at 13, if a 13-year-old starts having sexual experiences, that changes the way their brains adapt to sexual activity, sexual marketplace. And the ways that the brain can adapt is generally bad. When you start going through all of the possible solutions, it doesn't turn out well. So we're causing the earlier and earlier someone has sexual experiences, you're causing the brain now to go on a pathway of adapting towards promiscuity or towards mate switching or towards having a lack of desire deep into a relationship. All right. So the adaptation that happens goes left instead of forward in a positive direction. Whereas if you were to wait till the brain is fully developed and mature, and I'll get into this, you're not causing the brain to physically change and adapt in the same way. It's not as dangerous. Okay. So with that, let's continue. 15-year-old brain. This is the average age that most girls are losing their virginity. And this is in the teen years. An abundance of neural links can continue to be discarded. So what's happening is the brain starts to specialize at 15. You start to discard useless neural links, okay? And useless connections and useless drives. So now, if you, between age 13 and 15, have sexual experiences, that is going to create an erratic emotional state. And those erratic emotions and drive towards promiscuity and drives towards, let's say, dubious or illicit sexual behavior, those different things, pornography use during this time, all that stuff, it causes your brain to hang on to neural links that would encourage more anxiety-driven behavior, more sporadic, mentally unstable behavior, emotionally unstable behavior, because that's the state you're putting yourself in when you're pursuing sex at a young age. So you're not discarding the emotionally erratic stuff. A woman who's 30 years old and a crazy emotionally erratic person, right, in her relationships, and she's all over the place, she's hot and cold, everything, very likely she started that process when she was a teenager. Her brain didn't cause her to discard some of those protective emotional measures because she stimulated it. So the brain is kind of a use it or lose it thing. And so when you use parts of the brain to stimulate bad behavior or maladaptive behaviors or emotions at this age, your brain hangs on to that now as something useful in the future versus letting your brain mature and get rid of all those things and having a better emotional and mental state as an adult, you see? So continuing into the 17-year-old brain, as we can see, this is between 17 and 18. Your brain is getting more developed, certainly more developed than like the 13-year-old brain. Abstract thought starts to happen. The deep purple and blue colors are demonstrating maturing prefrontal cortex, and it shows why the brains in an older teenager is capable of dealing with far more complexity than a younger kid. So the 17, 18-year-old can definitely deal with more complex problems than a 12, 13-year-old. All right. This development leads to a burst of social interactions and emotions among older teens. Planning, risk-taking, and self-control becomes possible. Now, here's the problem, though. The brain is not fully developed, and this is why I'm taking it to 21. And I'm encouraging you to tell your daughters, tell your sons not to have sex until they're 21. And if you're out in the dating market and you're going to date younger women, which, hey, I get it. My girlfriend's 20 years younger than me, but she's 27. Okay. Her brain's fully developed. I didn't meet her when she was 17. I met her when she was 25. So you get what I'm saying. All right. You want to put a cap on it at about 21 for this reason. Because if you look at it, the brain is not fully mature. In the part of the brain, this is why it's a risk. The part of the brain at 17, 18 that is maturing involves with handling risk-taking and self-control and emotional processing. So now the 18-year-old girl throw in sex at 18 for the first time. She's not learning about handling risk-taking and self-control. She's learning to not have self-control because when she has sex, there's a drive to want to continue to have sex most of the time. And if that relationship or ends, or the guy she had sex with, kind of goes away, she ends up, wanting to mate switch to another person, have more sex. Like once a girl starts having sex, why is she going to stop having sex? You know what I mean? Well, of course she's going to pursue different experiences. And so that leads now to a pathway of training that brain to be more mate switching, to be more promiscuous, and to not have self-control. How's that going to bear out now when she's 30 and she's trying to have a relationship with some guy and trying to have a stable relationship? She's not going to have the planning, she's not been practicing. It's her brain. She's not practicing brain development for the sexual marketplace, which is to be able to have relationships with the opposite sex without throwing sex in. And when all the guys, of course, are trying to bang her, for her to say, hey, I'm not emotionally ready for sex yet, so I'm just not going to do it. And sticking to that for as long as she can, hopefully until she's 21, a girl who does that is training her brain to be a better long-term relationship partner in the future. Because in order to be better in the future, things like delayed gratification, things like managing risk, things like self-control, those are important things that need to be there. Those things develop between 17, 18, and 21, and sometimes into age 24, but we're getting closer to full development after 21. So you get to that point, it's like you have to do things. This is why, starting school and a job and doing productive things at 17, 18 is really important for a kid from a brain development side of it, and continuing that into 2021, and having also self-control and delayed gratification, going to study instead of going to party, going to work instead of doing a bunch of drugs or alcohol. These things are important for the young brain because that's going to train that brain while the brain is molding itself to be able to handle risk and handle, self-control, delayed gratification. You cannot have success. Let me just say, you cannot be a successful person without risk management, self-control, planning, and delayed gratification. So teens who become sexually active between ages of 17 and 21 are practicing being not successful in pretty much every other area of their life, to include their relationships. All right. So now we get into the 21-year-old brain. All right. You can see the big difference there in the coloring. The green, of course, was obviously the lack of development. So we're getting into more mature brain now. So at 21, although the brain appears to be almost fully developed, but compared to the teen years, there's still more development to be gained. Okay. But there's tremendous gain in a 21-year-old brain. Like, think about it. The difference between a 21-year-old and a 17 18-year-old mentally and emotionally is huge. All right. Unless, of course, that 21-year-old stunted their growth with drugs, alcohol, and sex, that normal 21-year-old brain, healthy 21-year-old brain, is so much more developed when it comes to impulse control and decision making than the 17-year-old brain. All right. And that's what we call. Now we're now at a mature brain. The 21-year-old brain is mostly mature, and we can tell by the coloring there, right? All right. So let's just do a comparison. Here's your 17, 18-year-old. The green is the less is lacking development versus your 21, 22-year-old. You can see the darker the purple, the darker the blue, the more development you have. You can see just at a baseline. And by the way, yes, girls and boys are different. Okay. But this is a female brain. Okay. Was what we're looking at. But as you can see, there's a lot still, especially in that prefrontal cortex and some of the connectivity of the hemispheres, there's lacking development. You throw sex in, then it starts to frame their sexual experiences for the rest of their lives in a bad way. It trains them to have less emotional self-control and less delayed gratification, less planning, less impulse control by throwing sex in 17, 18. Okay. By law, I understand why consensual age might be 18. That's the government. But by behavior, if you, especially young girls, can stave it off till 21, they're doing themselves a massive favor. And for you guys, you're not alone on this either. Tell your sons this shit, okay? If you're, and I'll get into why that is. There's a difference between having sexual access and abstaining and not having access. So we'll get into that too next. But when with young boys, even if you can stave this off, imagine the amount of, we'll say, alphaness in your behavior you'll have as an adult, because you will be training your brain to have emotional self-control and delay gratification. So now when that guy, this 21-year-old, let's say, abstained from sex, right? And then he's now having sexual relationships after 21, he's 30, and some girl is trying to emotionally manipulate him into a bad marriage or a bad situation. How much do you think this guy's going to put up with it? He's going to have the emotional maturity to tell her no and to walk away. Whereas the guy who's been, having sex since he was a teenager, he's been practicing being emotionally erratic. And now he's going to struggle. He's going to be that, that guy who's trying to take care of the girl, even though she's being emotionally manipulative, and all kinds of stuff is going to happen to that guy. So there's benefits to both genders on this, guys. Let's talk about neural pathways of brain change. Okay. So physical development at, once you go through puberty, that causes sexual desire. It's automatic. It's innate. Okay. It didn't, in our evolutionary history, it did not really benefit us to wait for sex 100,000 years ago, because most people died by something by the time they were 30. So you kind of had to, and also infant mortality rates were extremely high. So you kind of had to get on the mating train as early as you could, back during our evolutionary past. All right. So because you didn't know how long you were going to live, there wasn't medical care, disease or a predator or something or violence could kill you, before you even hit mating age. So if you wanted to be able to procreate and have your genes go into the next generation, we started having sex early. So the physical desire and the physical capability of sex happens right after puberty. That's where we are evolutionarily speaking. You just have to recognize, though, it's 2025. Your lifespan now reasonably is around 85 years old. We have excellent medical care that'll take you to the distance and beyond it. Okay. And we have an expectation of having healthy long-term relationships at some point in our life and good sex lives as well into our old age. And so we're living 3 times as long with higher expectations on our relationships versus what they did in caveman times, which was mate sharing and mate switching and killing each other and all kinds of stuff. And most people weren't surviving past 25, 30, 32 years old kind of thing. So we're in a different time now. All right. Just because our bodies tell us to have sex early, that doesn't mean we should. to secure our future success. All right. So continuing, so desire happens at puberty. Now there's 4 possible pathways that can happen once you get going. All right. Depending on your experiences as a kid, you can get going and start training your brain, moving right towards the involuntary celibate route. All right. Or you could freely abstain from sex. Okay. That's another route. Or you could start having sex as quickly as you can with whoever's going to allow it. And whoever's going to do it with you. And that's promiscuous. Remember, about 1/3 do that. Okay. And then the other third, most people don't do abstinence. That's a statistical anomaly. A lot of men end up involuntary celibate. Okay. About 1/3 of men end up involuntary celibate. For similar reasons to the girls, but I would say it's higher than in men than in women. All right. But those stats and numbers can get cloudy a bit. Right. But then we got serial monogamy over here. That's where, okay, you're having sex. You start having sex as a teenager, but it's with a boyfriend or girlfriend or someone you're going steady with or someone you went to the homecoming dance with. And then you kind of, have a little fling going for a few months and then that fizzles out. And then there's a month or 2 of a break. And then you hook up with somebody else at a party. And then you're with that, that girl's with that boyfriend for, 6 months or 5 months. And then he cheats on her. So she goes through that heartbreak and then she goes a couple months again, without sex. And so you get the idea, serial monogamy. It's not full on promiscuity, but it's definitely sex. It's definitely too early and too much, but it's kind of practicing it as a serial monogamy person. So I'm going to go through all of these 4 possible pathways and what the consequences are. Understand all these pathways happen based on your brain development and how your brain develops based on your behavior and your stimulus as you're growing older. And while your brain is a teenage brain and more susceptible to growth in any of these 4 directions. Okay. So destructive path number 1 I'll cover is the incel path. Okay. So the incel path, and I'll get to questions and stuff in the chat. I'm trying to blow through this. The incel path, this is where desire happens and girls don't want to fuck them. Okay. That's a lot of guys. So desire happens and girls don't want them. They're not the guy that girls are trying to get with as a teenager. It's about 80% of guys. And so guys have to come up with coping mechanisms to that rejection. Okay. Girls have to come up with coping mechanisms to the fact that everyone wants to have sex with them. They have too many opportunities. Whereas guys have to come up with coping mechanisms. Most guys have to come up with coping mechanisms that most people don't want to have sex with them or nobody does. All right. And then there's that 20% who has some or a lot of girls who want to have sex with them. And so that's where guys are more split than girls. Right. So guys end up going down this incel path because porn addiction, porn is so easily available to kids now. I remember when you had to, you had to wait for that Victoria's Secret catalog to come out. You know what I'm saying? That was like thing. That's how old I am. And nowadays it's just free on the internet like that. I didn't grow up with that shit. Kids today though, grow up with that. So if you're like in my age category or higher, like you got to understand, like kids just have access to porn. Like it was a big deal to get your hands on porn when I was a kid. And if you got caught, you get in trouble and all kinds of stuff, And so kids are trying to get it, but it was hard. Now, super easy. Right. So porn addiction happens, which leads to low impulse control. And this leads to high stress. So the rejection and the coping and the seeking out porn, they're still seeking out sex. They don't have a mindset towards abstinence. Their mindset is towards getting sex and they can't get the sex. So with that, they start to stimulate. They're stimulating the desire areas of their brain. Instead of practicing emotional self-control and stimulating their frontal lobe, they're stimulating their vagus nerve and lower brain emotional centers. They're mammalian parts of the brain that make them more high stress, more maladaptive, right? More emotionally erratic and having less emotional self-control. So the incel has less emotional self-control and brain development because their brain hangs on to all those neurons to help them be more stressed out, to have more anxiety, more self-protection, more depression, higher aggression, right? So this is the person that could definitely be susceptible to sexual assault, right? And other things, social problems, all kinds of problems, plus addictions like porn, things like that. Okay. Later, potential drug alcohol addictions. So that is one very destructive path that can happen. All right. Another destructive path is the sexual predator path. This is very much like the incel path. What happens is the desire happens in the brain. They want sex, can't get it. So they're a young teen as an involuntary celibate. They're frustrated, they're angry. All of the anger and frustration rises at their inability to get sex, and their addiction to porn and stuff is going up. So they're stimulating desire for sex, but they're being told by the world and by women that the world is a cruel place and doesn't care about you. Therefore, you should not care about them. And that is what gets instituted here in the involuntary celibate stage. But then what happens is some involuntary celibates learn some things and they get sexual access. So that involuntary celibate kid, that frustrated, angry kid at 13, 14, maybe starts getting laid at 17, 18, 19, 20. Okay. Maybe he learns pickup stuff, right? Whatever. So now he goes from stimulating and growing the emotionally erratic parts of the brain, stimulating the desire parts. Now he's getting access. He's satisfying access, but he's satisfying his access with often a predatory approach to getting women. Okay, so this is the guy who could actually be a rapist, right? This is the guy who actually would predate on women or predate on other people. This is the guy who might have personality disorder, all right? That can develop from this kind of stuff. This is the guy that might do actual abusive and toxic behaviors, not just stuff that some girl lies about because she's mad at her boyfriend. But I'm talking about the actual stuff, all right? Because now they're starting to go through the breakup and promiscuity cycle, usually, which is stimulating all this stuff, but they have all of this high stress and negative sort of approach to women in the world on top of it. So the former incel is a very dangerous route to go for a lot of guys. All right. And I'm talking, of course, this can happen in adulthood, obviously, but it's more severe when it happens to kids. When it happens to a developing brain under 21, you can get really bad outcomes in a person. All right. So what's the solution for either of those things? All right. So if you've gone down this road or just to prevent a kid from going down the road of being an incel and then graduating from incel to predator, what we have is a solution: conservative sexual values. I'm not coming from a church angle. All right. This is just the best way to handle your sexual values as a young person. Empathy for the girl, empathy for other people, consideration for others, and the idea that I'm going to abstain from sex until my brain is mature enough. Now, the kid could be getting rejected by women, but he's not after sex. He has the mindset of abstinence. And that mindset helps him to cope better and build less frustration. Now, in some ways, of course, we're making his morality a virtue, so to speak, or whatever we're saying. He's like, in some cases, it's like he's all right. His morality is kind of developing from a lack of access, but the lack of access is something an awkward teenager might not be able to help. But what he can help is his coping mechanism. So if he already has the mindset of abstinence, because until at least he's 21, because of brain development, right? Same reason why he's not going to try marijuana until he's older. Same reason why he's not going to try alcohol until he's older, right? Because it's bad for the brain, bad for the body. If he has that mindset, okay, that's going to steer him on a path of having consideration, empathy for others, and just having a value of, if I get rejected by a girl, it sucks, but it's okay because I'm not trying to have sex anyway, right? And it tends to be better off and prevent that guy from going the incel route and being able to turn around his lack of attractiveness and stuff when he's older. You know what I mean? And be a more attractive person. So having some more conservative values, even if it's a cope, is still better than the other route. Future thinking and development focus. This is critical for men, and it starts as teenagers. Thinking about his future, thinking about, you know what, someday I want, even if it's a blue-pilled fantasy for a kid, doesn't matter. Okay, at least he's thinking about it. He can unravel that later as he matures, right? Can read Rational Male or something while he's growing up, and I highly recommend it. But at the same time, he's thinking and developing and thinking about his future. Okay, and this is critical for men to do. If a young teenager is thinking about a better future, he's not going to get crushed by the weight of the rejection and heartache he has from women as a teen, because he knows that as he develops himself, things will get better. And I'll tell you, some of these young boys out there, if they just had a man that was in their life that they could trust, a father, an uncle, somebody, even a male teacher, to tell them, hey, you know what? You're going through a lot of shit, but it's going to get better. Like if they just had that conversation, it's going to get better, because as a young man, you have to make yourself into a valuable person, and that's going to take time. By the time you're 30 years old, girls are going to be falling all over for you, and you have all the options in the world. You just have to work on yourself now, make yourself better now. The better, you just have to, training that kid to have delayed gratification, right? That's a huge deal. And if a guy does that, that's a major solution. Social support for sexual values is critical on the female side. So the women that there's very few women that fall into this cycle. This is mostly a male thing, but some women do fall into the cycle for whatever reason, usually mental health issues. And so if they have social support for abstaining from sex until they're in a healthy relationship when they're older, that's going to be critical for them. All right. Now, if you're a guy who is the guy that went through all this, that just means you need coaching and you need help. All right. Some therapy might help, but therapists aren't going to know what to do with you. Join my school community. And I'm not trying to direct all the insults to my school community, but you know what though? The guy who does show up there and says, hey, I'm fucked up. I have a lot of bad patterns, started when I was younger, and I need to fix it. That's a guy I can help. All right. And getting in my community is a free thing. So just get on there. Link is in the description. All right. Now let's go the slut path. Okay. So there's another path. So we went the incel and potential graduation into predation path. And by the way, there are female predators. Just look at all the teachers having sex with students nowadays that are female teachers. So don't think sexual predation is exclusive to men. It's not. Okay. That path, those female teachers probably went the exact path I just went down. Lack of sexual access because of psychological difficulties, emotional difficulties, followed by promiscuity, leading to breakup cycles, heartaches, and basically stifling their brain development into being both infantile as well as self-protective. So when they become a teacher in a school, they haven't fully grown up yet in their brain, and they're wanting to be cool with the teenagers. And that female teacher also wants power and sexual power that she didn't have when she was a teenager. Now she's sleeping with students. So don't think sexual predation is exclusive to men. It's definitely there for women too, and they follow the same pathway of development. All right. So now let's get into the destructive slut pathway. All right. So this is the hookup culture thing. All right. So girl, we'll say usually girl, but some of the young chads can fall into this. What happens is they get the desire portion of their brain when they start to get into puberty, and then they start to, at a young age, hook up. They have sexual opportunity and they take it. This trains the brain to develop for short-term mating instead of long-term. They're not just having sex with people and then like trying to be girlfriend or boyfriend. They might be, but the end result is somebody gets dumped early. All right. So maybe the girl, when she loses her virginity at 14, 15, thinks this guy's her boyfriend, but he's really a 22-year-old guy who's, just looking to have sex with 15-year-olds. And so he has sex with her. She thinks she's, she's in a she acts like she's in a relationship with him because she gets all of the oxytocin bonding and stuff. And he ends up, screwing her friend or screwing somebody else and treating her like shit. And after going through that toxic experience with her first sexual partner, her brain is now framed for promiscuity. After that guy, she's banging all sorts of guys. And this is where the pathway of promiscuity or the destructive slut path ends up happening. Okay. She trains her brain to develop short-term mating instead of long-term. She's seeking high dopamine reward of sex with the oxytocin, which is the bonding portion, and the beta endorphin, which is the long-term bonding portion past like 6 months, that gets suppressed. So she's getting dopamine reward of sex. She feels good. Just even if she's not orgasming, it's the attention of it. It's the act of doing that. And she's not bonding. So effectively, she is training her brain to be able to have sex without bonding with her sex partner. How well do you think? And so now her brain is developing brain at 15, develops, fast forward, she's 32 years old and, wants to get married to the guy, right? Whatever. She doesn't have the ability to get the oxytocin and beta endorphin the way that she should because she trained her brain for short-term sex reward. And her brain developed in that direction. We were a promiscuous species that generally mate switched or were promiscuous among the tribe for a lot longer in our history than we were trying to get into long-term relationships. So it's very easy for a young girl or a boy, but there's a reason why boys stave off this effect. I'll get into that, but very easy for a young girl to get into promiscuous relationships when she's, have promiscuous sex when she's a teenager, for her to now steer her brain, which is already genetically wired. So they epigenetically stimulate the brain to become promiscuous and to get sexual reward from new partners instead of reward from a deeper, longer-term relationship. You see, we have mechanisms of bonding for a number of reasons, but we also have mechanisms towards promiscuity. We have the genetic capability for both. Some arguing, though, that some have more of a predisposition for one over the other, but we still, regardless of your predisposition, have the epigenetic capability of going promiscuous or going more relationship related. And once you go in that direction as a teen, very difficult to reverse because the brain was susceptible to development and then you started stimulating it with the behavior. So now the brain developed into one strategy or another. So these promiscuous girls, these girls who are promiscuous when they're young, tend to stay that way. And the data shows that they're the ones who are breaking up relationships and they're the ones who are breaking up marriages. They're the ones who are cheating. They're the serial cheaters. They're the ones who are, promiscuous throughout their entire lives. All right. And that starts as a teenager. So this is a very destructive path, particularly for women. Men, it's a little less damaging because men bond with vasopressin. And so men are more capable of promiscuous sex without bonding and still able to bond later when a girl is signaled as the potential bearer of his children, right? So when it's signaled to him that he has to caretake for a woman with his resources and efforts, that kicks in vasopressin. Guys sexually bond through a mixture of oxytocin, vasopressin, and beta endorphin for long-term comfort, okay? And so girls do not have the vasopressin response. They have that response to children, not to the guys they're with. In fact, if a girl has a vasopressin response to a guy she's with, she becomes unattracted, all right? So that research is there too. I'll put that in the description. Because of vasopressin, men are more capable of short-term hookups and still being able to pair bond later. Well, when I say pair bond, again, I mean having the bonding chemicals to want long-term relationship later with somebody in the future because of the vasopressin component. That doesn't mean, though, that the slut path for the guy isn't damaging. It's still damaging because it creates this breakup trauma cycle that causes psychiatric difficulty and stress in a young developing brain. So going through breakup and trauma cycle for both men and women can cause all these maladaptive behaviors later. That's the toxic behaviors, the toxic communication, the attachment problems, to avoidant or anxious attachment styles. All those things happen because boys and girls are practicing the breakup cycle. So when one or the other catches the feelings and has to break up, that's creating these traumas in the developing brain that the brain is not as good at, not as well equipped to handle as they would be if it was a 21-year-old brain. So that's why it's really damaging for males. Males can still bond, but there's going to be a lot of traumatic results from a guy who's practicing short-term sex, whether he realizes it or not. And then there's less impulse control. So you're not, again, this is a critical time of a teenager's life to practice impulse control. And there's less impulse control when someone chooses to be promiscuous. There's almost no impulse control, right? So that person's not practicing that sexual impulse control, which leads to cheating and mate switching later on in life. So for both men and women, as a teenager, participating in hookup culture is devastating. There's a very good chance they will not fix this and be able to bond and have good long-term relationships later. If they are going through a period, if they are having a promiscuous teenage experience. And a lot of girls is the most danger for women because it renders them incapable of having that bond altogether for any kind of long-term relationship. When she settles down, she's no longer happy. By the way, guys, ask yourself, why are women not happy? Why are women seem to never be happy in their relationships? This is why. Most of them started having sex when they were teenagers and had random sex with people. And that's it. Any girl with over 10 notches, by the time she's 18, 19, 20 years old, she's practicing this to some degree. Throw in, the average. There's so many girls who are way more than that. A girl, by the time a girl's 30, having gone through, 25 to 35 sex partners is not uncommon anymore. It's pretty common. Okay. In a way, it's not even I'm not even trying to slut shame girls. It's just, it is what it is. So doing that and starting that process early, what's her prognosis for being happy with a guy long-term? Probably isn't very good, is it? Even though she'll say she wants it, and because she doesn't have it, the dopamine's saying to get it. So she's going to put all of her effort into it. But then once she gets it, she's not getting the pair bonding response to sex. And research shows, and I'll put this in the description as well. Research shows that sex and the sexual bond is critical for long-term success because the sexual bond is what stimulates all these bonding neurochemicals. So if she has a suppressed excitement and suppressed motivation to have sex when she's married because it's the same old partner, and she gets less vasopressin and less beta endorphin, which is her means of bonding, what do you think that prognosis is of her being happy? How many of you guys got into relationships with women who really wanted the relationship and you got married and then you couldn't do anything right? Right? And then a lot of the stuff with dread game, some of the stuff, things that I teach, it's there, but a lot of that stuff is trying to overcome massively bad brain patterns that have been developed since they were teens. You're trying to stimulate high emotion and kick the dopamine centers back into gear and then create intense sexual experiences to really kick that oxytocin out from, the dead because her system's broken, right? And these things do work, but the reason you're having to put that effort in, that you're going to my coaching group to learn that, is because you probably picked a girl who went this pathway for a while her brain was developing. A very good chance. And she just can't be happy. And sometimes you got to cut your losses at that point. And, it's a big deal to determine that when, you know what I mean? It's hard to determine that. That's what we do in a one-on-one session. I can't give you general rules for that. Okay. But this is that pathway. Now, what's the solution to this? Well, if you've already gone through it, good fucking luck. Okay. Guess what? Sometimes you do shit and you don't get to fix it. Sometimes shit happens, it causes a problem, and you don't get to go backwards, fix that problem. It is what it is. And for a lot of these cases, that is what it is. And I'm sorry to say, if a girl wanted to, let's say, enter into pornography, like she wanted to be a porn girl, be a sex worker, and she waited till she was 21 before she started it and didn't have sex with anybody prior to, she would still be, I'm not saying that's a good or healthy route to go. I'm not suggesting to go that route. Okay. There's obviously complications, but she's still better off at least doing that. And it has a better chance of recovering than the girl who, bangs a few guys when she's 14, 15 years old. Really. And so good luck. Now, I do believe, though, people can change and don't give up. And there are things we can do. And I've coached women on this, and I've coached people on this, and I've helped people make changes. But most people, the people I get as a client already have the mindset to change. And that mindset to change is a demonstration of capability of change, right? The vast majority of people are never going to come to me or to anybody else, and they're going to cope and cap, and they're not going to solve this problem. This is why these types of videos aren't popular. All right. Because the truth of the matter is sometimes you do things to yourself and you can't fucking recover. And that's how the brain is. And that's the way it is. That being said, though, it behooves you to try. And so someone who's done this has a long road of brain retraining. You have to actually retrain your brain. And a normal therapist is probably not necessarily going to be able to help you with this. All right. You actually have to train your brain to react differently. And it's going to, it's quite the undertaking. All right. And then another thing out of retraining the brain is to seek out a peak sexual partner for an LTR, guy or girl. If you've been through a lot of notches, particularly when you're a teen, you were the promiscuous route, having a peak partner, meaning the best sex you ever had and the best thing you could ever get with in your settling down years, is your best solution on top of retraining your brain and retraining your habits and some of these things. That's your best solution there. And that's critical for women because of hypergamy. So hypergamy is still real. It's still a fact. And if a girl is having higher intense experiences when she's younger, let's say that 15-year-old gets with a 22-year-old guy, and that guy is an adult. So the power differential between the two is so great that she ends up having an intense bonding experience. And then that guy screws her over or whatever, or there's a breakup. Now she goes through the intense breakup experience in a still developing brain. Then she seeks out other partners and all this. The guy she gets with when she's 30, even if that guy is a better guy and a better relationship partner, is not giving her the intense experience that she experienced when she was of that age and having sex with that older man. You get what I'm saying? Because her brain was still developing. The guy was an adult and she was a kid, so he had a lot more power over her. And it's a first bonding experience, and like all of those factors being there, that's the, the red pill community guys will call it alpha widowing. That's when there's alpha widowing. Okay. And so she can't get out of this to have a long-term happy relationship unless she gets alpha widowed by her peak current partner. If her best experience was in her past, she can't have future experience that is going to be sustainable for anything long-term. Okay. So that's the reality of it. And that's part of how a woman's brain's wired with her attachments and stuff versus a guy. So this is a very dangerous road. Guys, if you can prevent your daughters from going down the promiscuous path, God bless you, you've done some good work, because this is the most destructive path a girl can take for sure. Somewhat destructive path, the next one is then the serial monogamist. This is where the desire happens in the teenage brain, and then they do start having sex, but it's in the context of a relationship. All right. This is a little better. Well, I'd say it's significantly better than the promiscuous route, but still not a good route and still damaging to a growing brain. Reason why is because, okay, so what's being stimulated here, the yellow in this diagram, is the emotional centers and the anxiety and all the mammalian brain high aggression, anxiety, stuff like that, emotions, right? All the erratic stuff is being stimulated. There is some frontal lobe self-control, delayed gratification happening though, right? Because she's not just having sex with anybody. She is having sex in the context of a relationship or with a boyfriend. She's waiting and making a guy wait for a little bit. She's not jumping right into new partners necessarily. So she's not behaving in a promiscuous way. She has a boyfriend for a couple of years, and they end up having sex when they're 16 or 17 or whatever. And then they have a sexual relationship and all that. I mean, this is not good, but because they're too young, but it's still better than the promiscuous route. They're stimulating all the desire. The other parts here that's shown being stimulated is achieving the sexual act. Okay. But they're learning some impulse control, some delayed gratification. They're learning social relationship skills because they're trying to keep relationships together and having sexual access within that context. So they're developing learning relationship skills. All skills, by the way, a young person can learn without sex until their brain is ready for it. So they don't benefit really. There's no higher benefit to doing this versus abstinence. Let me just say that. But they're still training their brain to mate switch. And the reason why is because as soon as that sexual relationship breaks up, they go through the breakup trauma. And oftentimes it's severe breakup trauma because it's not just a casual person now. Okay. So this is a serious relationship that they got into when they were too young and their brain was still developing. Now the breakup happens when she's 17 or 18. That causes severe breakup trauma. And then that creates maladaptive behaviors and emotional baggage going on. I can think of people I know who had serious breakups, girls who had serious breakups when they were 17, 18 years old, and they were still talking about that shit 10 and 20 years later. It affected the way that they approached their relationships in the future. They held on to trauma from it. And it's because the brain is still developing. So all that stuff, all these negative experiences is framing future experiences in a bad way. And so this leads to all kinds of maladaptive and destructive behaviors. And because they're training themselves to mate switch, they're weakening their beta endorphin response to past relationship cycles. So in other words, this serial monogamist will tend to go through relationships every 6 months to 2 years, and then they fizzle out. They lose the motivation to stay in a relationship because all of these distress signals that they've been training their brain with since they were teens go up, and the bonding and long-term, beta endorphin bonding signals is somewhat suppressed, and they end up basically emotionally feeling like they need to leave the relationship rather than work things through, right? Work things out. And so a serial monogamist starting at a teenager is practicing and learning serial monogamy and mate switching, not long-term 20-year, 30-year, 50-year marriage stuff. So why does this matter? Well, I mean, she might be a good person to have as a casual sex partner as an adult or something, right? But if you're going to get into a marriage or have kids with this person or get into a long-term thing with this person, and she doesn't have the self-awareness of her own behavior, and she's been, from a brain development side, pushing herself towards serial monogamy, Well, good luck. You know, this is the kind of person you need to make wait for a serious commitment. Okay. You need to make wait for at least a couple of years, because after that couple year period and that relationship cycle happens, her bonding neurochemicals are going to come down, kind of despite what you do. She's going to go into this cycle, and she's going to have to work through that cycle to stay with you. And a lot of women won't. A lot of women will just leave the relationship. And so, this puts people down a bad pathway of destroying relationships every couple of years. It's not necessarily as bad as the promiscuity route, but it is still not good. Okay. And so it's still a destructive path, and they're instilling that into their brains. So what's the solution here? If a young teenager gets, okay, so your daughter has sex with her boyfriend or whatever happens, and it's a boyfriend situation. Let's say she's 16. If she can move back into abstinence as quickly as she can, and they wait till they're 21, they have good prognosis. All right. That's the best way to start staving off damage. Okay. It's not impossible to do that, because people who are churchgoers often do that or try to do that. Right. So that would be to move back into abstinence to minimize damage till they're at least of a healthy brain age to process sex. Right. If this has happened to you or somebody else, right, seek help and actively recover from breakup trauma. So a girl, particularly if you're with some girl, if she has not been getting help to deal with breakup trauma from stuff in her past, she's going to carry all this baggage into relationship with you. Okay. Seek out long-term mates, only settle with sexual bests as an adult. Seek help and train. You have to train and develop relationship skills. Look, if you've been a serial monogamy person and you did that when you were a teenager, you started a pathway of adaptation that is not conducive of healthy relationships, period. Okay. So you have to be open-minded and recognize that you don't know shit, and you have to be willing to unravel all of the shit you do that's not good in a relationship. And your woman needs to do that too. Women who are listening, you need to do that. If you're fucking 28 years old and you're not married and happily, whatever, and things are going great, you don't know what you're doing. And so if you started that process as a teenager, you've developed habits and behaviors all the way down to the way your brain is developed into bad coping mechanisms for relationships. You have to be willing to challenge that and unravel that and be willing to develop new patterns. Okay. And this is especially in the areas of conflict resolution. All right. And especially in the areas of seduction and building desire. High desire solves a lot of problems in relationships, as well as conflict resolution. If a couple can handle a conflict in a healthy, productive manner and has high desire for each other, that relationship is going to be great. They're going to be happy long term. If those two things break down, they're not going to be happy. All right. Another plug for the community. For you guys, join my community. It's free. Click the link in the description. I go over a lot of stuff and skills to help in the areas of conflict resolution, and particularly seduction and building desire. Those are critical things. Any relationship requires that, but you especially need it for somebody who's practiced and been mate switching since they were teens. All right. Because what's going to prevent mate switching when the relationship you're in gets hard is being able to handle conflicts and is being able to build desire. Right. Last is recognizing that your relationship patterns, this is for the ladies especially, that you are going to repeat these patterns. You're going to get frustrated with your relationship at a certain period of time when certain things are sort of stimulated in your brain, and there's going to be the tendency to want to leave. All right. So if you want long-term success, you have to learn to work through that tendency now. That tendency came from brain stuff. All right. Now, here's the best way. That says voluntary abstinence until 21. And yes, fucking 21. All right. I know it's crazy, but it's true when you look at the brain. So you have the desire, the teenager has the desire for sex, and then they are learning to abstain from it and to delay gratification until they're old enough to process that. All right. This increases their ability to have delayed gratification. They learn better skills at being more resilient, being more disciplined, being able to delay gratification. All right. They have better emotional regulation. They have stronger impulse control. Now, understand, this is not the incel who couldn't have sex. This is the person who learns social skills, who's developing healthy relationship skills, might even have a girlfriend, right? Takes girls to the dance, hangs out in social groups where there are women. All right. Like, this is the guy who has access to women and who's developed and learned, we could say, good game skills as a teen. He's just not taking it, and he's not allowing himself or the other person to take things in too far into the direction of sex. All right. That's a stronger position. That's not the incel position. Someone who does this is going to cause their brain to develop in a very, very positive way. And they're not going to lose anything. It's not like when they're 21, all of a sudden now they don't have enough experience with girls. So blah, 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 blah. That's all bullshit, because if they know how to be attractive and they have the social skills, they can start having sexual relationships when their brain is developed and they lose nothing and they have everything to gain. All right. It's the guy who is the involuntary celibate route, who is forced to abstain from sex, wishes he could, and is trying to figure it out and can't figure it out. That's the guy who struggles with women and doesn't have enough experience with women. It's not, the 21, the kid the young guy who has experience with women, but is voluntarily not having sex with them. Okay. That's the guy that's going to be in the best position when he gets older. His brain's going to develop the best. There's zero downside risk to this and everything to gain. And again, I make the statement. We'll come back to that. I make this statement. I'll stop sharing for a second. I make this statement. I'll make it again. Okay. If a girls and boys, okay, waited till they were 21 to have sex, if that was the norm, if that was the social conversation, we would have so much better results in the dating market. Adults, okay, would be happier, healthier. Women would be more fun to be around, easier to deal with. Guys would be less apathetic, you'd have less people who are abusive. You would have less problems. You would have much more abundance in opportunities for success if people just staved it off a little bit. That's the data all points to it. So we need to now have conversations as to why that's not happening. Okay. Why are we not having that conversation? Why are we not believing in this shit when we know it's true and the science shows it? Okay. It's simple brain development and it's not that hard to understand. Why are we hiding this info? What's the agenda here? All right. And so go back to gonna wrap this up very soon. But I have to address this, which is the assault victim path. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because this is a whole nother topic, but being the victim of an assault, excuse me, leads to trauma and disassociation from the body and maladaptive responses, and usually leads to promiscuity later. So now a teen who is assaulted is inheriting all the negative outcomes of promiscuity and brain development problems there, as well as dealing with all of the brain development issues that they're going to have and problems from the assault and trauma from the assault. So if you've had experienced sexual assault as a teen or a child, you've had your bonding abilities most likely completely shattered. And that's just a sad reality. Now, that doesn't mean you can't be happy in the future. It just means that you really need to seek help to repair those mechanisms. You can't take it for granted. So many people have had assaults happened and they had their teen sexual behavior that came as a result of that. And they don't do anything to fix any of it. And they just want to feel like they're okay. But you're not okay. Okay. Your brain developed in a way that is going to hinder you and bring you pain and bring you your sexual partners and your relationship partners pain and any attempt to have good relationships. All right. You're going to have a bunch of maladaptive behaviors and problems that you need to work through. And if you don't have those problems, it's because you've worked through them, most likely, right? And so you have to work through these things, and that's not going to happen automatically or without help 99% of the time. So that's all I got to say on that, because I could get more and more into it. But, we're just in the interest of time. That's a whole nother thing. But I will say kids are more susceptible to assault with a very sexually open culture that assumes that teens can have sex and there's no consequences. All right. So when our culture assumes that there are no serious consequences to teen sexual behavior, that opens up more of a propensity for kids to be victimized sexually as well, and young teens particularly. So keep that in mind. All right. So this is destroying future bonds. All right. Boys, the risk is going from incel to promiscuity or serial monogamy route reinforces patterns of breakup trauma and negative attitudes towards women, towards relationships. And obviously severe sexual assault would be a risk to boys as well. Being an incel is a risk for a boy. For girls, her biggest risk is besides sexual assault. Okay. Her girl's biggest risk is promiscuity, which suppresses pair bonding, serial monogamy, and the breakup trauma and building maladaptive patterns from that. And age gap power relationships, which are fine as adults, not good as teenagers, right? That teenage girl who's getting with the adult male destroys her future due to hypergamy and those drives, as well as brain development. So why are adults destroying children? And this will be where I conclude things. Older male so here's some examples, right? We'll talk about assault. Older male or female family member who sexually grooms a young teenager for the purpose of teaching them about pleasure. This happens, unfortunately, a lot. Or innocent game playing, okay, amongst older people with younger kids. And then the parents just kind of look the other way. You know how often in these sexual assault cases, the mom looks the other way while dad is doing something to the daughter? Or, the parents are looking away and excusing some other family member, like an uncle or a cousin who's older and sexually exploiting a kid. And then they penalize the kid, tell the kid not to talk about it, all kinds of stuff. I mean, this is what's going on, right? So like that is destroying kids. How about this is real? How about a mom who takes a daughter who wants to be the cool friend mom, and she takes her daughter on spring break and encourages her to hook up with genetically fit older guys, right? Basically, I knew, I can think of a particular story. A mom took her daughter and her friend to the Caribbean somewhere. The 18-year-old girl won the twerking contest. And then with a wink and a nod from the mom, got to go leave and get her BBC experience also, all at 18, right? How well do you think she was prepped for long-term relationships? Let me promise you, not very well. Who set her up for that? Mom. Mom did. Because what was mom's history? Mom's history was cheating, mate switching, a terrible upbringing, and being terrible in relationships, having terrible relationship experiences. And mom was a strong feminist type, even though she wouldn't identify as such. Can't trust a man. wouldn't want her daughter to be sexually bonded to a man. She wants her daughter to have control over a man. That's her worldview. That's her paradigm. What does she do? She sets her daughter up to get alpha widowed or to get her vagina destroyed on vacation, supports her to hook up and, is all part of it. And having those why? Because if she's not bonded to a guy, then a guy can't have that power over her. So mom participated in destroying this girl's, when she was 18, this young girl's abilities to have future success in a relationship. That was mom. That was single mom for you. All right. So we got that going on. How about mom who encourages the teen daughter to date older college age males? How about that 16-year-old whose boyfriend's in college and they're fucking, and the mom's telling dad to chill and well, she's growing up, honey. We knew this was going to happen, and that kind of stuff. Moms giving excuses for daughters to fuck is absolutely shameless, dude. It's unbelievable, and it's happening all the time, and we just accept that shit. We accept that. And it'd be one thing if the daughter was 24 years old or 25 or 21 years old. It's not. These girls are teenagers. All right. How about parents who do this is what I was saying. Most parents are doing, check the blocks, right? Be home by 11. Hey, don't have sex till you're married. But let's get you on the pill anyway. And sure, you can stay at your boyfriend's house. And, I like their parents. And, parents who are checking the block. They want to say that they do the right thing, but they're really accepting that their kids are going to be having sex. And because of that, they're covertly encouraging it. They're not sitting down and having real conversations about the effects of sex on the brain and how damaging it can be going forward. Now, granted, you could have that conversation. Maybe kid's not going to listen, but if you have a good relationship with your kid, they'll listen. I have a 14 going on 15-year-old boy. I know. You have these good conversations. They'll understand it. It's better than not, right? It's not too hard to see the results and what things are going out there. How about parents trying to be cool or accepting sex positive communication without any discussion or risk of the brain damage, or parents trying to prearrange sexual relationships among teens, like your daughter should hook up with my son kind of stuff. And they're not saying have sex, but wink and a nod, right? Wink and a nod when I introduce you guys and you guys go hang out and you're now boyfriend and girlfriend. They know they're going to have sex. They just look the other way. Assuming that any teen is an adult at 18 or 16 or 17 and therefore should be able to make consensual sexual decisions freely. Listen, the law may say what the law says, but brain science says different. Okay, so don't be encouraging, she's 18. She's not developed enough yet, guys. Okay, she's just not. Being your kid's friend, talking about all your sexual exploits when you were younger, trying to bond with your kid like that, yet not giving any context of damage that it causes. That's a covert way that parents are supporting this. Parents who think it's okay for their teen because they did something worse and they turned out okay. That's very common, especially among a lot of women. Women don't want accountability. They don't want a shame for their previous sexual behavior. Feminism says they shouldn't have any shame or guilt and that everything is sex positive. So they don't want to present their behavior in a manner that says, maybe this was damaging to me later on in life. Most people are unaware of the damage that it caused. How many people are out there just acting like in ways that are not conducive of healthy relationships and just arrogant about it? Like so many people, so many women are so fucking arrogant and they act like shit and they treat their partners like shit. And they're absolutely arrogant about how all of that stuff. They don't see that their behavior is wrong or bad, let alone that these patterns started when they were teenagers. So how are they going to tell their daughters or tell their sons? They're not going to, right? Now watching your kids' internet use, having free access to porn and all the damage porn does to the brain. I'll put that resource in the thing as well, in the whatever. If you are a parent and you're not having this discussion that I've covered in this video and teaching abstinence to your kid until he's 21, you are part of the problem and not part of the solution. Hands down. Okay? You are not doing your due diligence as the adult in the equation to set your kid up for success. If you don't talk about the third risk, according to the book I'll link, the third risk being brain development and brain damage that happens from sex. All right. Now, why does this happen? Why don't we, and I'll get to some of the things, why don't we recognize this as a problem? Well, part of it is because throughout our history, we didn't have the brain science to recognize it. So our innate drive is to start mating early. So that means that, we just sort of do that. And then we kind of are mixed up in our morality about it. But we have an evolutionary drive to sexualize things when we're teenagers. And some adults who don't understand how damaging this is still retain, sexual desire to younger people, women and men can see a 16-year-old boy or girl as attractive. That's still very wide open out there. And so because of these things, like, people are reluctant to talk about it as being bad because it's just not innate to think it's bad. But when you understand and are informed, you know how devastating this can be. And now you have a responsibility to do something different, right? But that's one of the reasons. The biggest reason, though, I think, is beyond the innate aspect of our desires to start mating as early as possible, is that we want to have a cognitive dissonance about it. Most adults had sexual experiences when we were younger and when we were teenagers, and we don't want to believe that what we did was fucked up, especially women. They don't want to believe that their sexual behavior as a teenager was fucked. All right. They want to justify it. It's kids being kids, teens being teens. It's healthy exploration. All that language, all that sex positive language is all designed to ignore the fact that this is damaging to teenagers. All right. So people don't want to believe that what they may have experienced when they were younger developed patterns over time that caused the failure of their relationships and heartbreaks as adults. They don't want to recognize that stuff. They want to absolve themselves from guilt. And that's the biggest reason that they're not training their children differently than what they did and what they were trained. The mindset being, well, it happened to me and I turned out fine. Meanwhile, you're on your second divorce, or your wife or husband doesn't like you, or whatever, right? So the other reason this is sort of kept a secret is because the evidence is just not, people aren't informed on the evidence. Because of the first two things I mentioned, the cognitive dissonance, the lack of accountability for your own behavior, and the innate aspect of wanting to have sex when you're younger, people don't want to look at the facts. They don't want to look at what I'm presenting. They don't want to look at the books I'm going to reference later. Okay? So they don't want to be informed. The third, though, most sinister reason that a lot more people than we think is the third most sinister reason for nothing being done about this is a lot more people than who you realize are pedophiles, straight up pedophiles. There's a lot more people out there who want to sexualize young kids and young teens. This is regular people that you know. This is people who are in power. You know somebody who has the wrong kind of porn on their computer. You know somebody who would have sex with a teenager if they could, or has. That's an adult. You know somebody who's exploited a kid. And there are people in power who do that as a whole system, right? We know from that. We know about some of that stuff. So the reality is that sex trafficking can happen, and largely because teen sex is being presented as socially acceptable. And people who have, designs and tendencies towards younger, more vulnerable teenagers and kids are promoting and pushing ideas that these things are just normal and they don't matter, and we need to be positive about sex. We need to be our kid's buddy, and don't set up, you need to be your kid's friend and not a parent, and don't set up boundaries and don't have these discussions, right? That's being pushed by very nefarious people that are out there. And many of you who aren't those people are falling right into it. All right. The fact of the matter is, if teens are less likely to participate in a sex life until they're 21, and they have that understanding, and that's a social narrative because of brain science, if that's what's going on, it would make it a lot harder for them to be groomed into being trafficked or abused. That's the reality of it. So you need to take this stuff seriously, man. And you need to, hopefully this enlightened you guys to a lot of stuff. Hopefully this was something to take serious. I joke around a lot in my cast. I'm a lot less serious a lot of the time, but hopefully this is something you guys will take to heart. Okay. With that, if you want to have continued dialogue and discussion, many of you have been affected by this, you're affected because girls you're with started this process when they were younger. They framed their brains in certain ways, or you did as well. And it's like the blind leading the blind. Don't forget about my community in school. Okay. If you're a guy, it's a men's group. Okay. Join the community. It's free. I'm happy to have you there. We can talk about whatever you need to talk about. Now I'm going to go through some chats really quick, and then I'm late for an appointment. So let's go. Thank you, Ryan. Ryan's got the county relief. Nice to see you guys. Nice to see if it is really you. I don't know if it is or not. If it's actual Rolo Tomasi and actual Rhinestone, because we got like some fake accounts. But if it is you guys, hello T Diamond. I wish someone told me that a woman's manigula, part of the brain that processes fear, is suspended during intercourse. Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of things about that, right? And we'll keep going here. Just kind of perusing the chat a little bit. Okay, thank you for the super chat too. I appreciate it. It does help the algorithms. Great stream. Definitely a touchy topic, but it needs to be discussed. Psychology should not be overlooked, even if it contradicts religion. Yeah, 100%. Right? I mean, 100%. When we have new science to say something different, maybe stop having in your rules that it's okay to hook up with 12-year-olds. You know what I mean? Juan's one of my friends from the community. Staff Sergeant Juan says, Paul has the tact and education to actually tackle this topic with facts and science in an intelligent, but also digestible way that you can understand. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Thanks for all of the great comments here, guys. Thanks for the support. This is a hard one to do, to be honest, because I don't know what people are going to say about it. So as I kind of continue through 2-starred comments, and then we got this one, last one. Thanks again for the super. Siege D says, hey, Paul, is there still damage done to a guy's brains who waits until 21 to start having sex, but watch porn in their teens? Yeah, there's still some damage you're doing to your brain by watching porn. That's a whole topic now, probably worth its own stream. What I'm going to do is I will put that, I'll put that book when I get to it. I got to run to an appointment, and then I got that. So I'll put that book when I get to it in the video description as a resource. Yeah, it is damaging. Now, damaging doesn't mean the end of the world. Okay. But it just means that you have some things to correct and fix, and that's all, and if you want, jump in the community, ask about it, and I'll talk about ways of correcting problems created by porn addiction and porn abuse, especially porn abuse like when you're a teenager, watching porn or catching porn like a couple of occasions, kind of like us Gen X's ended up doing, right? Catching porn here and there as a teen. It's probably not hugely damaging, but habitual porn use from free internet porn that kids are getting into now as teens, that's a different story. And so if you want more information on that, get in my community. The link is in the description of this video, and ask questions. There's no shame in the game. Okay. We can solve those problems, and it'll be, and help you get on the pathway to success. Well, thanks again, everybody. And share this with people. Share this with, if you have a teenager, share it. A 15-year-old can watch this stream. I know they're going to feel tortured for 2.5 hours. I'll try to cut it up into some shorter segments in the future, but share the stuff. You either have better if you have the conversation, but if you struggle with the conversation, share the video. Okay. It's their future depends on it. Really does. Thanks. Take care.